Uh,
One,
Filming.
two, all filming? Sweet, yo. Alright, well, what's poppin'?
Nothing much.
How you doing, man? What's
Good,
your
bro.
name? Like, introduce you.
Yeah, so I'm Guled. By profession I'm a policy advisor. Outside of that, I hold various different roles within the community. So I'm a social and racial justice advocate, particularly for African and former refugee communities.
It's amazing, yeah. We did some, some background checks, we did some background work and stuff like that, but there's a lot of stuff about you on the internet.
I know.
I'm a
It's a bit messed up. Like, yeah.
I mean, it's crazy because obviously, like, we all millennials and stuff like that, so, like, social media, right? Like, it's always going to be on there.
It's always going to be on there, man.
But
Once it's on the net, that's it.
All the stuff about you is, like, positive. Like, it's all positive, bro. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, like, someone's
Positive,
actually...
but also controversial.
Could be. And I don't know if you could say, like, really controversial. Someone's called you, actually, the voice for youth in the future. And let me like start off with my first question,
Wait,
bro.
actually?
Yeah.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah. It gets jumbled up, right? But you started the African Youth Forum.
Yeah.
Yo, so tell me about that, man.
So the African Youth Forum was in response to a research report which I worked on in 2015. It was a whole year research project, and that looked at African youth experiences with the police and the justice system. It was the first study of its kind done in New Zealand. Basically how the research came about is it was youth-led, so a number of young people started coming forward to myself and other young leaders in the community, and this was up in Auckland. And the young people mentioned some issues around their engagements with police and it not being in a positive light. So we're talking about racial profiling, police brutality, and so forth. And they wanted their stories heard. So we applied for a lotteries grant research fund. Dr. Camille Nakid from Auckland was the principal researcher on that project. And I was a co-researcher alongside her and some others that were up in Auckland. Now, when we completed the report, normally when people do studies, it's like it's done.
Right.
You put that on your academic resume or you've got a publication out of it. That's it.
Right.
But for us, we wanted this to be a catalyst for change. And for me, the findings were really, really grim. It broke my heart. Just
in terms of just like negative findings.
Just in terms of these young people's stories, in terms of their encounters with the police, being called niggers, being beat up by the police, being profiled by the police as well. They'll be out with their friends, their Pākehā friends. Some of them are girls. They'll ask the girls, "Are you okay? Is everything fine?" And for me, I wanted to put all that information in the public realm,
right?
Which is why I started the African Youth Forum.
Right.
So it served as a platform to launch our report and a public platform in terms of engaging with media and the wider public, the community leaders, parents, and young people. And that was initially how the African Youth Forum came about.
Right.
But ever since then, it's turned into an annual thing where the whole purpose about the forum is it brings together young people, academics, policymakers, practitioners, community leaders. It brings together everybody basically, and the whole purpose is to discuss issues that are hindering African youth from reaching their full potential and generating the solutions to resolving those issues. So that's really how the African Youth Forum came about. It's now led by a group of other young people up in Auckland,
right?
And it's exciting to see that initiative kind of take its own wave and others coming in on board and so forth.
True. I mean, I hate to call it out, but it's almost like a blessing in disguise. Because I mean, those findings are horrible, right? I'm almost like it's hard to hear that happens in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Right. Because we see that on social media happening in the United States and the UK, but
So, in terms of marginalized communities' engagements with the police, we know there's been multiple studies that have been done with Māori and Pacifica. So we always knew that this was the reality, And this just really served as another sort of empirical evidence to what we had always known about.
Right.
And you're right, people don't necessarily think of that stuff happening here in New Zealand, but it's really happening in our own backyard, and yeah, we need to have a serious reflection about that.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And I mean, like, the project that we do for the same sort of project is all about lived experiences, and I guess like what you can learn from that, and I guess teach other people. And it's amazing that you started the African Youth Forum, and now it's its own living, breathing thing, right? Like you've given it to the young people to, I guess, create their own direction in it as well.
Absolutely, and I haven't necessarily checked myself out completely. So I'm now serving as kind of as a mentor, right, for the next upcoming generation of leaders.
Yeah, you gotta oversee, right?
Yeah. Because in many ways, I felt like I never really had that coming up, and it wasn't even quite easy in itself. Starting the African Youth Forum, trying to get momentum within the community and others and so forth. So that in itself was a challenge. So to be able to provide the support which I myself did not necessarily have in that situation is quite important to me.
And I mean, I don't know if I can shout anyone out, but obviously, like, it is quite a big thing. Because I remember, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, like Psycho Yusuf.
Yeah.
He's
Psycho.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what it's listed as. I think I can't remember, but I remember meeting him, and he just had like that energy, right? Like,
yes.
He's got quite a bit of energy, but he's real passionate about that.
Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, when we came out with the stories, Psycho was one of the very few people who were brave enough to front this and actually talk about his experiences on national TV, on 6 p.m. news, basically. And it takes a lot of, it takes a lot of guts to do something like that. So I have a lot of admiration for Psycho, definitely.
Yeah. That's a young person that's really like is leading from the front.
Yeah, it's coming up, next generation.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm gonna get back to that as well. But just something that you said previously about, I guess, it happening in our own backyard, right? There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I mean like there's no I guess for the people on like Spotify and Apple Music, they can't see, but we're both black.
Yeah.
Correct. And there's a lot of misconceptions. I mean, even in Wellington. Even in where I'm from in Kaitaia, you got to open that sort of thing. And like, what do you feel like New Zealand's sort of, because we're progressive as it's labeled, but we're, because I have my own opinion on that. I'm really keen to hear yours.
Yeah, I think firstly it's quite important to recognize that everybody's experiences is quite diverse.
Right.
Secondly, when we talk about being black in New Zealand, we need to recognize that actually black migration to New Zealand is a relatively new phenomenon of its own. Before the 1990s, it was almost rare to see a black person in the streets of New Zealand.
But it still is now.
And it still is now, like
you see someone on the street and you're like...
the unofficial acknowledgement, I see you, brother.
Yes,
it's one of those ones. The thing about New Zealand is that we almost view ourselves as though we're the sort of utopia where it's really progressive. We like to think of ourselves as being much better than other nations in terms of things like race relations. So we always tend to compare ourselves to Australia, UK, USA, and we give ourselves a lot of comfort in that sense. But the truth of the reality is that racism in Aotearoa is not in doubt. Firstly, we got to recognize that we live in a land which was built on the foundations of racism, colonization, and it hasn't really stopped ever since then. And it's interesting because every time I always get those remarks, or every time I discuss issues of racism, I quite hear, at least we're better than the Australians.
Yeah.
And it gets me thinking, why do we have to set the bar so damn low? I'm serious, my brother. I'm serious. So, this country has its very own form of racism in which we're quite in denial about. And the truth of the reality is that it's not in doubt. And it's an interesting topic. I find the most difficult thing about racism in Aotearoa is just talking about it.
Yeah.
Just literally speaking about it.
Right. Yeah.
Is the hardest thing because
yeah.
people are uncomfortable. People are not prepared to have uncomfortable conversations.
Right. I'm like, I'm gonna call this out right now as well because we're talking about this right here, and I feel uncomfortable because I'm like, should I be talking about this?
Yeah.
You know, you ever in like a cafe or like in a public place, and I say the word black, and I'm like,
yeah.
Just make sure because people are gonna be like,
yeah.
You know.
Of course.
You know, like it's that unconscious.
And that's what people don't recognize is that the uncomfortableness is not just for non-black people or non-people that aren't necessarily of color, but it's also of, you know, it's for us as well, you know, because we got to be courageous in having these discussions and speaking our truth. So it's not necessarily easy and it's not a straightforward thing, that's for sure, but it requires a lot of gut discussing issues of racism. Absolutely.
And I don't want to pull it up obviously, but just to move forward onto your Festival for the Future, your speech there, and you talked about racism, but also you talked about the global culture. Honestly, I saw that, I was like, man, who is this guy? Because you not only did you like really speak from the heart, but like you brought it from a position where I felt as if you were like almost like a neutral person. Like people were actually gonna like stand back and be like, okay, hold on, let's hear what he has to say. And as a black person in New Zealand, as a black person around the world right now as well, like you're gonna be labeled first and then listened to second.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And I think that's something that you did in that speech where you just like, I think people were actually hearing you, you know. And talk me through the process of that speech, man.
Oh man, it was probably one of the most nerve-wracking things I had ever done in my life. You know, leading up to it, I was thinking, gosh, what was I thinking, signing up for this? And you know, for me, I've been doing a lot of public speaking as of recently, and it wasn't necessarily an easy decision in terms of actually accepting these gigs to do talks and so forth. But I came to a realization that if you don't like the current narrative that is out there about you or about your community or about your people, if you don't like those that are speaking up for you, if you're not feeling what they're saying, then why not control the narrative yourself?
Yeah.
So for me, I take it as though it's almost a sense of responsibility to shift that narrative. So that was the biggest, without a doubt, Festival for the Future was the biggest talk that I have done today. You know, we had about 1,500 people in the audience, and for me, I was trying to get a message across that resonated with everybody, which is that we've increasingly diversified over the years, and we're going to continue to diversify. You know, we've seen some rapid changes, and it's only just going to grow, and particularly our generation, right? Like, you just look at your cohort of friends, you know, where they're from, you know, and we know from statistics that the younger population is also much more diverse. Yeah. And for me, I wanted to hit home the message of, because we all have a role to play in helping shape a much more inclusive, welcoming society. And we've got a long way to go. We might like to think of ourselves as a socially progressive nation, but the truth of the reality is we've got a long way to go in terms of ensuring that we're inclusive and welcoming.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you as well, like the feedback on that speech, because I mean, you look on YouTube, you look on LinkedIn, you look on Facebook. There's a lot of positive feedback, but I know for a fact that, you know, some people aren't gonna agree with all the things you said.
Yeah.
Some people are very like, I don't even want to say closed-minded because that's such a term that's like been thrown around so much. But some people just don't want to learn.
Yeah.
And they don't want to accept that. I was wondering, like, what were some of the, like, I guess, more conversational tones of feedback you got from there?
You know, to be honest, across the spectrum, I've received positive feedback.
Right.
I highlighted racism in my talk, and I try to do that in a non-confrontational way where everybody was able to gauge, even people who necessarily don't find themselves in a situation where they have a lot of knowledge about racism, right, or aren't necessarily on the receiving end because they carry the privileges and so forth. I did receive a lot of positive light but like, you know, there's always gonna be people who always come up and say, hey, you know, why are you always so fixated on racism?
Yeah.
You know, why just like literally it's not that bad. It's okay, you know, and for me, I just refuse to accept to settle for oppression and to settle for people who have racist views and discriminatory views. I will forever be courageous and call them out on it because somebody has to. Somebody has to. But all in all, I did receive quite a lot of positive feedback. I received positive feedback from Tangata Whenua, who were grateful that I made acknowledgements of Māori in terms of the role that they have played in providing refuge to all sorts of groups fleeing persecution, you know, because when we talk about refugees in this country, like I said in my talk, people quite often refer to 1987 as being the year when we introduced the formal refugee quota, but people quite often forget the role that Māori have been playing and still are playing in providing us safe haven in this land.
Very true. Very true. And I'm so glad, you know, you said that because I think that means a lot to just the people of New Zealand to understand that there is so much more, there's a cohesive nature around it, right? Like we do find brothers in the strangest places. For example, like I met you here in Wellington, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna talk on like just touching on mental health, for example, because I did see on your LinkedIn, you know, something that was absolutely courageous, and once again you retrenched it. Like you are the first to do some stuff in I think your field, and if you're not the first, you're really out there showing it, you know. And I think you were for African refugee mental health and young men's mental health, for example, as well. Where was that held?
So that was in Christchurch,
which is. I don't even have to say anymore, right? I don't even have to say anymore.
Like. And there's actually a story to that, and there's a story to why we went to Christchurch in the first place.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of having conversations about well-being and mental health and ensuring that our young, because you know we all come from diverse backgrounds, and with that brings a lot of challenges. You know, identity issues, trying to find your own feet, and with that can be quite negative for our well-being and mental health ultimately. So I'm really all about bridging that divide. And the reason why we went down to Christchurch actually is because we had 3 suicides within the Somali community alone in the past year. Now, the Somali Christchurch community is very, very small.
I can imagine.
Very small.
Yeah.
So for 3 people to commit suicide, that's a significant number of people.
Yeah.
And I had already been doing some stuff in terms of having conversations here with the Wellington community, young people, sort of in an informal setting, and we decided to formalize this, which is how our space came about. And we're in the midst of finalizing our charitable status, and we took it down to Christchurch because we realized that there was a need to have these conversations. And honestly, I was taken back by the bravery of these young people, just the maturity of the conversations that we had, but also just how much further we have in terms of progressing conversations about well-being, because we come from different cultural contexts. So it's quite difficult to talk about mental health. So for example, for me, in Somali, there is no word for mental health. Literally, the word translated in English is crazy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, okay.
So when you come from that sort of cultural, religious upbringing, it can be even much more challenging to discuss these issues. And when you can go to your parents, you know, or your elders or the community who tell you, you know, go to the mosque and pray. And you know, look, ain't nothing wrong with spirituality. I think that's an important part of good well-being outcome. But we need to have much more meaningful conversation in terms of how we can support our rangatahi and so forth. And it just, for me, at the end of it, it relayed to me just how much work that we have to do. It was interesting because during the workshop we were supposed to discuss the challenges but then also we were supposed to reverse that around and turn it into solutions. And this was a 3-hour workshop.
Okay.
I was thinking, that's too much.
Right, yeah.
But you know what? 3 hours, we didn't even get through all the challenges.
Right.
So we didn't even get to the solution, which is part 2 is coming up.
Right.
Yeah. Part 2 is coming up.
At least you're moving on with it, right? Like.
Yeah. At least we were able to discuss those challenges, and
Yeah.
at least we were able to have an honest conversation.
Yeah.
And it took me back. So, for example, for me, you know, I've had my own sort of challenges with well-being and mental health. But it hasn't necessarily been in the same light as some of the young people down in Christchurch. And
Right.
it's made me realize the privileges that I have. So, for example, you know, some of the issues that have been, I suppose, really, you know, caused bad well-being outcomes for me may have been in a work setting and so forth. And in Christchurch, some of these young people were talking about, I can't even get a job.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
I've got a degree, I'm qualified,
Yeah.
but I can't even get a job.
Right.
You know, so and I've got my parents here, because when you come here as a refugee, you're essentially your parents' biggest dreams.
Yeah.
Your parents sacrifice everything.
Absolutely.
So you cannot afford to be unemployed. There's like a world, like the world is on your shoulders.
Yeah.
So it kind of made me step back and recognize my own privileges and you know, and how much more work that we have further to do in terms of supporting our young people.
Right. Right. I think that's amazing, and I'm gonna touch on that sense of like we have so much to do because we. Actually, I'm gonna break it down even further. This is the crazy part, and this is what I always sort of like think about. You work, I think, at the same pace as me, right? I think you do a lot of work, and
I think alike.
I see you sometimes like, hey, Guled needs to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think some people say the same thing, like, oh, kind of needs to slow down.
Yeah.
Like, hold on, but like we work at the same pace, and I like always think it's crazy that understand that our cultures are so vastly different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm from the West Indies, Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
You're from Somalia. And we have nothing in common.
Yeah.
Understand that.
Yeah.
But to the eye, apparently we have everything in common. Right?
Yeah.
And I always wondered that is it because that we're in New Zealand that we somehow find this like work ethic and this culture to not just succeed, but once again like there are people down in Christchurch, right, that I can't even get a job.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the truth of the reality is, Kai, if you're not white in this nation, you gotta work 10 times as hard.
Okay.
10 times as hard. Extra harder. You know, we've got people out there who have masters, PhDs, that are still unemployed in our community. You know, I come from one of the most highly educated communities in New Zealand, yet our employment outcomes aren't necessarily the same. So for me, when I finished university, I was doing, you know, volunteering role after volunteering.
Right.
I feel like I had to work 10 times as hard as my peers to get to where I'm at. And plus, the playing fields aren't even necessary. They're not even,
right.
You know, you go to a job, you know, there's a thing that they call unconscious bias.
Yeah.
You know, like I've heard stories of people changing their names, literally trying to do everything.
Yeah.
And,
I definitely heard it.
And for me, I can't even bring myself to doing such a thing because that would be such a defeat, you know? My name is everything. And, you know, my own brother's changed his name.
Right.
Yeah, his legal name. And just so he could get
work,
a job.
Yeah.
And it's turned out all right for him. But that's I suppose that's the drive that we have. And also, you know, Kai, we might come from different places. So I might come from a refugee background, you may come from a migrant background, from the other side of the world. But we all have one thing in common as refugees and as migrants. Our parents came here for better opportunities.
Right.
So
my mom literally messaged me like that 2 days ago.
Yeah. So we can't disappoint.
Yeah.
We can't disappoint. We have to. It's our way of paying them back.
Yeah.
But you know, it's the world that we live in. It's a very unfair world, and that's the truth of the reality. We gotta work 10 times as hard.
And it's just like, you know, sometimes you just can't even complain. You just gotta do it.
Yeah,
right.
You can't complain. There's no complaints.
I ain't got time to complain.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
pretty much it. That's
exactly.
pretty much it. I like same thing for even if you're from Katai. I know a lot of my friends and my peer group from there. Like, I can't go anywhere south of Auckland.
Yeah.
Like, cause they don't know where it is.
Look, I thought growing up in Hamilton was like literally the hardest thing ever in terms of a small city.
Right.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like Kaitaia, and also being black up there as well.
Yo, you're the only black person for miles. You know.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. You know. So, Kaitaia is like an amazing community. I still think it's my favorite town in New Zealand. And I tell you what. Every time I like go back up to Kaitaia, like Air New Zealand like took off the planes and stuff for Kaitaia, so you can't fly there anymore. You gotta fly to Kirikiri. But I'm like, no. I fly to Auckland and I bus. Because I see New Zealand change into my favorite part.
Yeah.
And it's this isolated, like, untouched, like, bush town.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But everyone from there knows you're at a disadvantage if you go somewhere else.
Yeah. And also, I just, you know, for me, at least growing up in Hamilton, there was other people who looked like me, who spoke like me, you know, who I was close friends with.
Yeah.
So but you know, despite that, because I remember growing up and trying to do everything I can to fit in. I was ashamed of my own identity. I try to do everything I can. I try to hide away from my own refugee background. When people ask me where you're from, I'll claim a country that has the furthest thing away from refugees. Literally, you know, I'll be like South Africa. Or something like that. You know, just so that the stigma, I wouldn't be associated with it.
Right.
So at least I had that sort of a community, a sense of community. So I can only imagine it must have been quite tough in Kaitaia.
It's tough, but once again you gotta take the initiative, right? You gotta create your own.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother said to me, she was like, they don't know nothing about black people out here, so you gotta really lead the way. Yeah. Because the next black person that comes here in 10 years, they're gonna be like, oh, Kai. Yeah. And if you do some BS, they're gonna expect BS out of that person, right? So it's like the initiative, and it's about leading the way, and then that comes back to, you know, with the African Youth Forum and what you did, you know, the fact that y'all even started on their research and pulled up some findings that I don't know if you were surprised to see or not. From my side, I'm a little bit surprised, but maybe from people in your area, in your community, they weren't even surprised to see those findings. But
I wasn't fully surprised, but I was surprised to a sense in terms of just the hopelessness of our young people, in terms of them not even having a point of call, anything like that, because and also when you're a young person, your identity changes in this country. So for me, I'm Somali, but for some Somalis, I'm not Somali enough. Right. You know, I see myself as a Kiwi, as a New Zealander, but for some people, I'm not Kiwi enough. I'll always forever continue to get that. But where are you really from? Right?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
But it's interesting you say leading the way, and I think that's definitely something that has influenced the work that I do. I felt like for me, in terms of the experiences that I've had, I've always been the first person in terms of whether it's my community or it's in terms of who I represent that has gone through that journey. So for example, black African refugees in this country, we were the first in the 90s. They didn't know how to deal with us. We were literally like the guinea pigs. Right. So for me, a major drive of all the work that I do outside of my paid job is to make things better for the next generation, for the upcoming young people, because it hadn't necessarily been a smooth sailing. You know, there's some really messed up things that has happened definitely throughout the way. Yeah. But yeah, so part of, I suppose, my own leadership journey is recognizing that, and it's a big motivating factor of everything that I do, essentially.
I love that, man. That's a vision, as well as it's not even just a vision. It's like an engine, right? Like that's what keeps it going. And it's not even the fact that like you know that you have to. It's also the fact that like you got your own paid job, right?
Mm.
Like I always say that, look, my day job, I'm safe.
Yeah.
I'm safe. I have a career. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
And like I can move from that job into another job, still get paid. I'm gonna
Yeah.
eat. I can
Yeah.
pay rent, all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. But like to be who you are, for example, get your paid job, and then also do your passion projects on the side
Yeah.
to help out the other. That's a step further.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have a very rewarding career in public policy. So with my paid job, I'm also giving back, right?
Right.
I'm giving back, but I'm giving back to New Zealand as a whole, right? And that's my purpose. Public service is my purpose. But my passion is my community and my people. And for me, it hasn't necessarily been a smooth sailing in terms of navigating both worlds. You know, because working in public policy, there's certain, you know, codes of conduct that you gotta abide by and so forth. So I can't be everywhere basically just criticizing anybody that I want and so forth. So but I gotta make sure that the work that I do isn't necessarily a conflict with the work that I'm doing, paid work, right? So for me, I'm lucky to have both. I'm lucky to have a purpose in which I am also just as passionate about in terms of public service and giving back. It's my way of giving back to a country that has given so much to me and my whānau. But ultimately, there's only so much that you can do in such a role. So, which is a big driver of all the unpaid work that I do. And for me, it's getting those positive outcomes. It's shifting the narrative. Those are the things that really speak to me more than anything else. So I don't ever look back on it like, man, can't be doing this forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other side of that coin as well is like, I got no room to complain.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. I'm blessed. I definitely am blessed. You know, like I have, and this has taken me quite recently to come to grips with. Is to be seen as a role model within your own community. You know, I'm a high school dropout. You know, because my teachers told me university wasn't for people like me, and I began to believe in those messages, you know, and the labels that was placed upon me. And I gave up on myself, like I lost all confidence, and I picked it up. So for me, if so many people in my community look up to me as a role model, I want to give them an inspiration that they too can do it, that anything is possible. And that's why I have a lot of respect for when I see people like Psycho coming up through the grapevines, you know. We've got a lot of talent. We're blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's always been blessed, I think. You know, it's interesting you said you only reached that like you know, recently.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the same with me, because I can't remember what I was complaining about, bro, but like I remember I was in the airport on a little trip, and someone had like talked about how the Kuru Lounge is going to going to the kids and everything like that. I was like, oh yeah, like, that's a shame, you know, I like the Kuru Lounge, all that stuff, like am I gonna go? Am I not? And I just stopped. I stepped back, bro. I was like, man, like I'm glad I didn't even buy these flights, like you know, like
first world problems.
Yeah, exactly. And it's more of like, I could, when someone else says first world problems, I'm like, oh yeah, like that's fine. But like for first world problems, for me, I know what it is for third world problems. You know? And that's such a that's a big difference, and it's a big change for me that like every time I wake up this morning, I'm blessed.
It's you know, it's interesting you say that, because don't get me wrong, I complain from time to time. But I think growing up, I used to complain a lot. I used to complain a lot. You know, I would complain in terms of the predicament that I would find myself in. And for me, a life-changing trip that I had in 2008 when I went to Africa, it really opened my eyes. it really opened my eyes. This is right after I dropped out of high school. You know, I decided I was like, I'm gonna take a vacation. I went with my mom. It was a 3-month vacation. Like you know, our parents when they go back home, it's like they gotta go for for the full 3 months.
They take 4 suitcases,
months, 4, 5, 6 suitcases.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's like, you know, they're trying to make the money for the airfares. Like,
it's like, if I fly there, I'm gonna spend the entire time.
Exactly, because it's so far to get there. It really, really changed my outlook on life. True. It really changed my outlook on life in terms of recognizing the privileges that we have living in a country like Aotearoa. So we're fully blessed to have the opportunities that are all around us. We might not necessarily be equal in terms of access to those opportunities, but at least, you know, I count myself blessed. Yeah. Just like you just said. And for me, that was a life-changing trip because it inspired me to come back to New Zealand. Yeah. And to make a man of myself and do something meaningful. So sometimes you don't necessarily know what you have until you're out of that environment and you see something else. So you're right. It's easy for us to complain. It's easy for us to living in a place like New Zealand. But we need doers. Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, because I'm not gonna keep you forever, bro. I just got one more question because, even on that topic of staying blessed, and then we have to really pull ourselves back when we complain. Just how do you feel when you woke up this morning, man? Really good, really good, really good. You know, in many ways, Kai, I feel like there's so much more work for us to do. Sometimes it gets really tiring. But I felt really good because I was coming here and knowing that, you know, there's another brother of mine out here who's navigating through the world and about to make his own impact, and coming here for this podcast, I feel really great. Sure. That's amazing, man. I appreciate that. Absolutely. So after all this, I mean, obviously when you leave the podcast, it's a sad day. It's a beautiful day. But I mean, looking even deeper into the future, bro, what's next? What's next for now? You know, I've got some big ambitions, Kai. I'm not gonna lie to you, but we gotta take a step at a time. The most upcoming thing next is the Auckland Arts Festival. Yeah. I've got a talk up there with Gores, another academic, Leonard, and chaired by John Campbell. Yeah. And it's called Bad Refugee. Tickets are on sale now. And I know I just had to do that. Yeah. But yeah, just basically just preparing for my next talk, really. Yeah. Nice. That's man. That's a lineup as well. It's quite a lineup. It is quite a lineup. So it's the talk is called Bad Refugee. Yeah. And it's the title of the event itself is supposed to be provocative, right? Right, exactly. And it's come about as a result of you know, with the refugee narrative, it tends to pull at heartstrings, but also at purse strings as well. And one thing that I've come across a lot in the last year or so is that people have a lot of good and positive intentions, but the execution can result in a lot of harm. Yeah. And for me, I'm excited about this talk because I feel like that's the label that society has placed on me and my people, that we are bad refugees, that we don't necessarily integrate, and which really reflects upon current settings right now. You know, we don't take Africans, Middle Easterns, we kind of, it's not necessarily a ban, but there's like numbers have been drastically reduced, and you know, and for me, I believe that's based on the false misconception that Africans don't necessarily integrate as well as other refugees. So I'm quite excited about this talk and just putting in my 2 cents, speaking my lived experiences, but also trying to change people's perceptions.
Hey, I'm looking forward. Where can I get tickets, bro?
So tickets are up online.
Yeah.
If you Google Auckland Arts Festival, Bad Refugee, it'll come up. It's quite cheap. $20
I might see you there
at RTS Square in Auckland. Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah, I might just hook you up with a ticket.
Oh, okay,
I got you.
all right, okay. That's I'm trying to support those. So no, that's bliss, bro. Hey, thank you so much for coming on.
Cheers.
Honestly, man.
Appreciate it, man.